think we're live. Are we live?
We live. We're live.
I think we're live.
We made it. Oh, what's
We're
going
here
on?
finally. Good. How are you, man?
How did you get? I have this blue background. I'm a little jealous that you had.
I didn't get it. I'm just like in a full oasis of cream. I'm afraid. Very
You are
minimalist
blending.
vibes.
You're blending in very nicely with your
I
sweater.
should have worn a different sweater thinking of that now, but here we are.
I didn't mean to call you out.
Hi, everyone. Chris, where are you at now? You're in Stockholm, right?
Yeah, I'm in beautiful Stockholm. The sun is out today. People seem happy. I had one of the signature buns with my afternoon coffee. I'm really acclimating.
Are you in a cafe or are you actually at the hotel somewhere safe?
No, I'm at the hotel. I'm not at the hotel. I'm at the hotel. I had to go somewhere quiet. I'm somewhere safe. Yeah, I'm somewhere safe.
Good. So Chris and I, well, first of all, we have to stop meeting each other on these panel talks. So
No, we hung out. We hung out last week in London. We saw each other in London for a real, IRL.
Yeah, Chris was last week with his partner. They were coming to Matches Fashion to do a live panel talk with Alexa Chung. It was, and it was
That's
a full room.
It was a full room. Yeah. Thank God, because it was our first time. So we in London, so we didn't know, but we were lucky. It was good.
So Chris, why don't you start off? Because I know we're limited on time. Why don't you start off talking a bit about your experience in the fashion industry and what you do today?
Sure. So yeah, my name is Chris Black, and I have a business called Done to Death Projects, and we work with clients in fashion and media, kind of on marketing strategy, et cetera, et cetera. And I got my start actually consulting with New Balance, and then from there it's been everyone from Stussy and Tom Brown to now J. Crew. And I kind of try to help where I can is the best way to put it. So that like I said, that comes mostly in the marketing space, but everything from casting and photography to a little bit of art direction, depending on what the need is.
I come from a pretty similar background from the media. I used to work for Business of Fashion back in the day, covering youth culture. Here in London, I'm based. Then going into High Snobiety, where I was editorial director, covering youth culture as well, really connecting what we were doing on the front end to the back end with all of our partners. And then about a year ago, I started at a new fashion group called Vanguards, and we own brands including Anushka and Sunai, and I help them with marketing and brand and real growth. Today, I want to talk to Chris specifically because I know we come from that similar background about what's happening in the industry, right? So I started thinking about this last September when most COVID restrictions had lifted. Paris was just finished with the Women's Wear Week, and I kept on seeing all these brands basically trying to do virality tricks, right? We thought about what Coperni did, of course, with the dress, even what Tom Brown did with the big show, reenactment of Cinderella, I think it was, with actress MJ Rodriguez, and what Balenciaga did with the massive mud pool, Kanye opening the show, the leather lace crisp bags. Everyone from big to small was trying to do something to at least go viral on TikTok, it seemed like. And it really made me think about what's going to happen in the next 12 months. And my prediction is that we'll see a lot more brands trying to replicate that, whether it's with their advertising campaigns, the people that they work with, the shows, of course, that they do. And it got me thinking about what's this all about, right? People are, of course, trying to get the right attention, but sometimes it's more successful than others. And Chris, I want to start there with a big question. What the hell is happening right now?
I mean, look, there's only so many eyeballs, and everybody wants the same ones, is really the issue. So I think that the kind of like one-upping that we keep seeing, I joke about it all the time. It feels like people are, brands are competing to see who can spend the most money. You know what I mean? To do some of these things, and it becomes as a member of the business as well as a customer and like a viewer, it becomes which one of these things are working and why. And I also think there's an issue we're dealing with where there's a lot more people to engage to do this kind of stuff for you when you're a brand. It used to be there's these 10 A-list actors, that is safe. We know we can hire them and that will globally work for our campaign. Now we have a lot more channels. We have a lot more niche opportunities to hire a TikToker and try to have that same effect. So I think we're seeing it everywhere we go, from the bus stop to Vogue to social media.
Yeah, it's crazy nowadays. I started to think a lot about this idea of brands trying to create things at the speed of Instagram, right? And obviously they can't create product at the speed of Instagram or at social media. So they try to still get attention by all means necessary, you know, the boxing gloves are off, it seems, to get attention by any means necessary. Like you said, the bus stops in magazines, you know, ads through TikTok, through Instagram, you know, organic a lot. And I did a lecture in at Polymodo, one of the fashion schools in Florence. I think it was September or October, talking about this subject, right? You know, right after the backs of Fashion Week in September, like I said. And something that I really started to think about was why this started to happen now compared to 5 to 10 years ago. And I think I wanted to start off with this idea of this mediatization of fashion, which I call it, where it looks like in culture, all the roads now lead to fashion, whether it's music, whether it's design, whether it's art. Everyone now wants a part of the fashion industry to create one's image, obviously, specifically the music industry. You know, you look at the front rows, as you said, it's a lot more diversified who's sitting there than it used to be 10 years ago. And that means the addressable market has become a lot bigger, right? Also this idea, of course, of people now opening up what a fashion brand is. You know, a lot more people having disposable income, wanting to buy into the fashion industry. Social media, of course, with the runways that they do, a lot more brands doing e-commerce in a bigger way, selling via social platforms. You know, what do you think about this idea where fashion has become so democratized, for a better word, and what that's meant for how brands respond to their customers?
I mean, it's just a different play. I mean, the fact that, you know, one of the biggest drivers of fashion for men is basketball players. It's athletes. It's not even, you know, it's not even musicians as much as it used to be, you know? So it's like it really has kind of, for better or worse, infected every part of our lives. But I think that that's the thing. I think brands are almost grabbing at straws a little bit, trying to decide which of these kind of disciplines that we're talking about will reach the right customer. And often, instead of kind of putting the effort and the thought into one, they put a little less effort and a little less thought into all of them. And it can feel spread thin, you know. But I think that you know, at the end of the day, selling clothes is the point, you know, and that's the thing that I think sometimes we forget. You know, I see things over and over and over, and my first thought now is like, is this actually selling, or are they sending it to people for free and I'm seeing a lot of pictures of it? Like, what is the actual return? And I think at some point there's going to need to be a reckoning, but I don't know how close we are to that.
It's pretty interesting. Last night, this big article hit online about Pyro Moss, right? The New York-based brand. On The Cut from New York Magazine. It was a pretty scathing piece. You know, it was balanced journalism, in my opinion, but it was very interesting.
Agree.
One of the points they made is what you now say. It's amazing to get big attention, to do these virality tricks, you know, to seemingly be building your business, but behind the scenes, the question or the situation can be very different, right? Where the business isn't keeping up with all the hype you're getting.
Well, I mean, making clothes is hard. Like, it's hard. It's hard to be good at it. It's hard to be successful at it. And the reality is it's a little easier to make noise. It's a lot easier to make noise than it is to deliver a great product. And that's why when those two things cross over, you have a success, but you can't have just one, you know. That's the issue.
Completely. I always speak about the brands that we work with about creating this bridge between creative and content and commerce, obviously, right? You know, that's where the bridge is. And you know, here in London, I have this thing that I call like the 3-season curse, where you see this set template and this trajectory of these young brands coming up over the past 20 years. And it's similar in New York as well, where they get scouted out of the big universities and design schools, you know, whether it be Parsons or Central St. Martin's, by someone who either works for a big publication or a professional scout. You know, they get into this incubator program. They then get picked up by big magazines like Idea and Days, get worn by Rihanna, Bella Hadid, A$AP Rocky, sell at Dover Street Market in Essence, and within 3 seasons, they're dead because they're not able to bridge that creative with that commerce while growing their business.
No, I mean, I think the pressure to do that is obviously really high. And that story that you spoke about from New York Magazine was really a great illustration of that, because there was a point where you could not go anywhere without hearing about him or that brand.
Yeah.
You know, but it is, what happens is, and I think that this is true about a lot of industries, but definitely fashion, is that we're driven, it's personality driven in a lot of ways. You know what I mean? There are people that are just magnetic. You know, you think about Marc Jacobs, you think about Karl Lagerfeld, you think about even like the mystery of Phoebe Philo. It's like these people are Like we're buying into a lot more than just the clothes. But you have to have the clothes. The clothes have to be pretty good. You know what I mean? You can't just. But I think that the cult of personality is something that is really powerful, and it even as someone as deeply entrenched in this as me, I am victim of it as well. Like there are people that I just I love it and I want to buy in, and I think that's really powerful too. But again, that's still not enough. It's just still not enough. You have to bridge the gap, like you said.
So if you look at the classic, I always go back to Kevin Kelly, which was a digital culture expert, and he was one of the first people at Wired magazine in the 90s. And he always talked about this thing, and some of you on this call will probably have heard about this before, but generative values, right? Basically being those invisible intangibles that get stuck to a brand that you can't really replicate. And that's the whole meaning of it, right? It can't be counterfeited, it can't be reproduced. It's something that's that secret sauce that a brand has that the rest doesn't have, right? And he talks a lot of examples. He says, for instance, immediacy, right? If you can be the fastest as a brand, specific as a media platform, you'll always stick out, get the right attention, because that's something that can't necessarily be copied. He talks about personalization, specifically for fashion brands, something that's tailored just for you. Interpretation, and this is what we did at Business of Fashion, and I was working there. We might not always be the fastest, but we were sure as hell going to make sure that we were going to interpret the news in the best possible way, much like Virgil Abloh did with all the booklets he used to make and really interpreting what he actually meant to say with his collection instead of you reading it in a review or seeing it in a store. And then you had authenticity, of course, accessibility, embodiment. So think about the new Dua Lipa album coming out. You get the exact same track list as if you go to her concert. You can get the exact same people involved, but going to a concert, you always pay more for, right? Because you're getting this embodiment of this experience, being with different fans, seeing the stage decides, the dances, etc. So there's a few more actually that I wanted to mention. Patronage. People think that they'll pay for something simply because it feels good. And then findability, being found, is valuable in a sea of so much shit being out there nowadays. So I wonder how you think, because this is technically what you and I do in a big way, and we strategize it a bit more for the brands that we work with. But what we really do well is we add culture to the mix, right? We add these intangibles to something that you could technically get somewhere else, right?
Of course. I mean, look, I think it's like the amount of people that understand like fabric and construction and kind of the details of the actual clothing are very few and far between. I think what people relate to is the culture of something, like you're saying, and whatever these brands stand for and how they kind of interpret that and talk about it, whether it's through, film references or music or skateboarding or, whatever it might be. And I think that's what people actually can relate to. And I think that it's tough and difficult to kind of make that stuff palatable for a large audience. You know what I mean? Like a lot of these collections and a lot of the stuff we like are inspired by some things that are pretty like esoteric, but so I think being able to inject that into a brand, make that palatable for like a wide audience is the greatest skill. I mean, that's what we're all trying to do, because we all have these touchstones that we find so valuable that we want to help translate and make more popular and kind of give to other people almost as a gift. And I think that's there's obvious and non-obvious ways to do that. Obviously, I think every brand is doing that on some level.
Completely. This idea around getting the right attention nowadays seems to be a bit lost with a lot of brands, right? As we said earlier in the chat. What are some of the tactics, without spilling any trade secrets, but what are some of the tactics that you think make up a brand to be culturally credible nowadays and that still stick through the noise without having to go for virality tricks?
I mean, I think it's just about being clever while also staying true to who you are. I think it's like, I work with J. Crew and Brendan Babenzine, the creative director, who also has a brand called Noah. And, his touchstones are very similar to mine. Like it's punk rock, it's skateboarding. It's like, he has some surfing, like coastal life and all that stuff. And I think when we were doing a collaboration with Beams, and it was like, who should we shoot this on? And we talk about it, and we land on Mike Mills. Mike Mills is a filmmaker, but Mike Mills is also like one of the first graphic designers at Supreme, a skateboarder, and it made sense and it felt good and everybody agreed on it. And it was really successful for us. And we just did today coming out is a new barber collaboration. And it was with the chef Eric Repair is the model. And it's like that we were so excited because he's such a legend. He looks great in the clothes, but it's also like they do something. You know what I mean? Like these are guys that like do something. And we also, you know, a couple years ago, which is something that's obviously pretty popular now, but with Tom Brown, we dressed FC Barcelona. So they would wear Tom Brown to and from the games. And that was something that at first I was like, this seems like it's costing us a lot of money. And like, I don't fully get it. And then it's like, oh no, the strategy here is that FC Barcelona is a giant global powerhouse as a brand. Like this is big in China, this is big in Japan, this is big in the US. It was global. And then I started to understand the investment and how it actually worked and the value that those guys bring to the table. That maybe it took me a little longer to understand.
It's so true. And I think this goes back to a very key lesson where if so much of creative culture is now looking towards fashion or seeing it as a vehicle for their own growth, fashion should look elsewhere as well, right? And of course, a lot of brands has always looked towards art. You know, think of Marc Jacobs. He brought in art in a very early way. You know, Schiaparelli obviously one of the first, but I think they should look a lot more outside of their own bubble, right? Fashion is notoriously known for looking at its bubble. You know, it likes to sell a dream for those elite few that can actually attend their fashion shows, but then it kind of falls flat, right? And it's still very much around themselves. And, you know, working with the same models, working with the same creative directors, working with the same photographers, the same stylists. So what's a lesson in your mind? I like what you said about football, for instance. What's a lesson in your mind that that will help brands cut through the noise when it comes to working with different industries? Now, where do they start?
I mean, I think a lot of the streetwear brands, again, for better or worse, have done a great job of that. You know what I mean? Like, I think like, you know, this doesn't speak to me, but Kith BMW is genius. That's genius. You know what I mean? Like, that's really synthesizing two audiences. And like, you see the rise of this F1 stuff or whatever. There's going to be those drivers crossing over and be on the cover of magazines. That wasn't happening 5 years ago. So it's like, I think being aware of what's bubbling and what's coming and trying to figure out a way to do that that feels good for you, you know? And I think that's like, there needs to be, and that's, you know, it's really hard to keep up with all that stuff. You know what I mean? Like knowing what films are going to come out, what albums are coming out and kind of basing campaigns and timing it for tours, that's pretty straightforward. But I think trying to understand what's actually next and what's really going to grip. Like to me, you know, I think tennis is a big opportunity. I like to play, but I'm saying like that to me is like, these are young, cool, good looking athletes that have like, that do something really incredible. Like, let's get in there and tell a story and use them to help us and vice versa. I think it's staying on top of whatever it is culturally and making sure that you're at least one step ahead and not, you know, 3 steps behind or referencing your own, you know, your own campaigns from 15 years ago, like you're saying.
Yes. That's a really good point. I mean, I think to add to that, I think a lot about, I wrote a piece a few years ago for High Snobiety about universe building called Brands Aren't Companies, They're Universes, right? And I think expanding one's universe means also knowing what next step to go into that feels authentic to the brand, right? You know, what a Gap does, for instance, needs to be very different than where Tom Brand goes into, needs to be very different than what a niche brand from Asia does, right? And I think too many brands get into this, fall into this trap of wanting to work with the same creative directors and work with the same photographers, as I said, and they feel, oh, if I get this, then we'll be authentic. Well, back when I was at High Snob, one of the biggest questions I would always get was, can you replicate what Jacques Mousse is doing? Can you replicate what Telfar is doing, right? Well, you can't because you aren't that brand, and also you're already late, first and foremost. And it doesn't fit with your product that you're selling.
Those are two great examples of brands that feel so authentically cool and really feel like they're coming from the designer. Like they feel, it all feels extremely, whether you like it or don't like it, if you look at it for an extra 5 minutes, you're like, wow, this really feels real. This feels real. And I think that those, and that's part of the reason those brands are successful when the product at one point wasn't that accessible. You know what I mean? Like it's not but the story is so good and what they're doing is so authentic and interesting that you have to take notice, you know, and then the business kind of followed, you know what I mean? They figured it out. Like you have a hit bag, like you pre-sell, you know, you do the shows are such big moments. Like they figured it out because they kind of just stayed the course, which I think is hard for people because when the tough gets, you know, you start to panic, you know, you start to do things that might not feel right for you. And I think that's when the missteps happen.
I can't tell you how often brands have come to me and said, should we be on TikTok? Should we work with Billie Eilish? Should we be on Discord? Yeah. I'm like, yes for you, no for you.
Yeah. No, I mean, I have these discussions too all the time. And I'm like, look, I don't like, I know all of these things work, but that doesn't mean they will work for you. You know what I'm saying?
Completely.
That's the thing. Like, they all work. We have data, we have proof that they work, but whether they work for you is the conversation you have to have internally.
I want to speak a bit about something that fits in with this. I think a lot about speed nowadays, right? Like I said earlier
Sure.
on, brands need to keep up with the speed of Instagram. They obviously can't do that with physical goods, so they have to do that with usually digital storytelling, with store events, bringing people in with their local communities. And I think a lot about brand shifting from being reactive to proactive, right? And I think there's a real secret in that to almost trend forecast what happens next, as you mentioned earlier, right? Who to work with, what to do next. And I think a lot of brands struggle with that. That's why they look at consultants, like you and me, for instance. But do you have any answers around what they can do intrinsically within their operations to shift from being more reactive to proactive?
I cannot stress this enough. You need to have people in your organization that are young and plugged
Yes,
in. Like, I
absolutely.
don't, like, I am 40 years old. There's a limit to what I know. You know what I'm saying? There's a limit to what I know. And I think that,
Completely.
like, having young people around that are really plugged in, really in that community, is the greatest gift you can give yourself. Like, it's just, I don't, I see it all the time. You go somewhere and you're like, all these dudes are my peers, but we're trying to talk to people that are in their early 20s. Like, again, I know a lot. I know more than most 40-year-olds, but I don't know enough. And that's why you have to have a good team of young people that are plugged in and understand what's going on. And also, like, they can be your ear on the street. Like, they bring it to you, and then you can help translate it on a larger scale. And I think that's something that's, like, pretty overlooked especially, I mean, not like in a retail level. I think, like, young cool people have always been the ones that work in the store. You know what I mean? That's like the skate shop model. That's like what, that's what we've always done. But I think on a corporate level or a design level or a direction level, like, having a couple people around that are part of what you're trying to do is really necessary.
I absolutely agree. I've been saying this for years to people in the C-suite, especially, that they need to
Yeah.
hire younger people because it's ridiculous. Like, having been in so many rooms over the years, from big luxury brands to sportswear brands to fast fashion retailers, and even beauty brands as well, you just see that it is incredibly homogenous, the people who are sitting in that room, right? It's
I mean, I have 5 guys on speed dial right now for these questions. If I don't understand something, I can call my friend Kobe and he's going to explain it to me.
absolutely.
You know what I mean? And I think that that's, like, pretty invaluable. And I know it's hard when you have a big job and a lot of responsibility. These obviously seem like details, but I think that's almost a set it and forget it kind of thing. Like, the value, as soon as the value's built in.
Absolutely. And what about community, though? Because I think that is such a buzzword. It is an important
Yeah,
word, but it's
it's
become such a
insane.
buzzword, right? Because it's so overly used. So many companies, whether it's a publisher or brands, they mistake their community for actually simply being their readers or their customers, right? There is no two-way
Yeah, yeah.
dialogue. So what do you
No,
think about actually breaking through the noise and actually creating a community that is really authentic? Where do they start?
I mean, this is something we're dealing with at J. Crew specifically that I'm kind of
Yeah.
leading a little bit, is like, hey, like, we have this Bowery concept store for men. It's going really well. We're programming events and it's great. Like, we're taking the show on the road. Like, community is a real life thing. It's not always Discord and Slack and Instagram. Like, we're going to
Mhm.
go do events at our top doors, like men's stores, or we're going to go to San Francisco. We're going to go to Nashville. We're going to go to Atlanta, because I think that that's the thing, is that because we live so much online in our phones, that's what we think community is. And I think that there is a big part of it there. But I think that this, like, the real life stuff is more important than it ever has been, because I think people do crave it in a way that they might not even realize. And I think that you have to activate offline and online to really have, like, community, if we're using the term as it should be used.
For sure. And then when you spoke about retail, multi-brand retail is obviously good for discoverability. Brands can't always control the experience themselves, as I said. So is owning and operating your own retail locations, as you mentioned with J. Crew, a better way to speak to customers, or where's that balance between the two?
I mean, I look, there's some level of legitimacy that comes with having your own store. Whether it's one store, whether it's 300 square feet or 10,000 square feet, you control the messaging as soon as someone walks in the door. You control how it smells, you control how it feels, you can what it
Yeah.
sounds like, who works there. And I just don't think you can replicate that online. I just don't think, like, clicking on a website ain't the same. It's just not. I think that, like, I mean, this morning I was over at NK, the big department store in
Mhm.
Stockholm, and I literally discovered brands I'd never heard of. You know, it's literally where it did exactly what it needed to do. But you're right. It's like I'm going through a rack in their like sports section, and I'm learning about stuff. But yeah, it's obviously a small section of what this brand offers. You know, so I discovered it, but now I'm going to go somewhere else to see more because they didn't have something that spoke to me personally.
It's a good point. I was at Selfridges yesterday here in London just to check out the produce. So I haven't
Yes,
been in a
yes,
while,
yes, yeah.
and I started to see a lot more shop in shops. But even for this, well, no, they're not small, but smaller brands. You know, it used to, of course, be reserved for the big ones, the Dior's, the
Yeah.
Vuittons of the world. Now I saw Jacques Mousse has a bag pop up in there, or a permanent shop in shop. Actually, it looks like Chrome Hearts is there all of a sudden, and a few more smaller brands. You know, even on the younger level, there's Kith Treats, there's a Skate Bowl.
Yeah.
And you're slowly starting to see the big luxury brands coming into the younger space, you know, the Gucci's, the Fendi's. And I think a lot about this idea that you mentioned, direct to consumer, both in terms of commerce, but also in content, right? And I think a lot about this, obviously coming from the media world. I genuinely believe, this is a controversial statement, but I genuinely believe that if your brand is good enough, you do not need media to be the middleman to tell your message, right? And I think about a Gucci, for example, that has so many millions and millions of followers on Instagram alone. That's just one of their many channels. And they have hundreds of stores around the world, shop in shops, their website, their TikTok, etc. I don't understand why they would need a Vogue or an ID to tell that story as much as they need a Selfridges or another retailer to sell their products, right? Keith, your thoughts on that?
I agree with you. I do. I mean, I mean, look, I have a deep place in my heart for magazines and media because I consume it and I love it and I contribute to a lot of them the same way you have, you know, and I think we both are the right age to like romanticize that. But yeah, I mean, I think that that's the thing though. I think that the reality is the brands have more power now than they've ever had. I mean, that's the thing. Like I think that the magazines and the media outlets need these brands to pay the bills. So
Yeah.
the the ads and the editorials and all that stuff, like they're in control. Gucci's in control. But I do think that I think that the shop in shop stuff is interesting because it to me that's not the experience I want to have at a
Yeah.
multi-brand department store.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
like when it's merchandised together. I think that's like the fun of like discovery. But I also know that I'm shopping differently. There's a lot of people that go into Selfridges and they say, I want a Jacquemus bag, and they walk right there and they buy it and they walk right out. I think that really is what happens. So I understand the need for them. I think that changes what the department store or the multi-brand store like actually is. But I don't think there's any stopping that at this point. I think that's our future.
Yeah. I wonder how brands, you know, with that in mind, when they think more about direct to consumer, both in terms of sales and in terms of content, where is that? What lens do they need to have when they're looking at new platforms? I think a lot about this because it becomes so unmanageable for so many friends. You know, they're lost at sea, so to say. There's every
Yeah.
month there's a new platform that comes up, different regions around the world with their own platforms. You know, Discords, TikTok, Kakao Talk in Korea,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything in China, which is a whole other ecosystem that a lot of brands still don't understand. What filter should they have to see, okay, I'm going to go for this, I'm going to invest in this, I'm going to leave this out, and this is how I tell the story throughout all these things without replicating it?
Unfortunately, I think that's a combo of something that's really tough to quantify, which is like gut. You know, I think sometimes
Yeah,
it's like, does this feel right? Like, and if it doesn't, let me take a step back. Let me think about this. Let me talk to everyone. We don't need to do it right this second. I think it is a gut thing because I have these conversations all the time. It's like, Chris, should we be on TikTok? I'm like, do you want to do TikTok? And they're like, not really. I'm like, then don't do TikTok. Like, I mean,
exactly.
like, it's not going to work if you don't want to do it. It's just like anything else. If you're not really putting your foot in it, if you're not really putting your heart into it, the customer can feel that, you know. But if there's for example, if there's somebody in your team that really wants to do it, you know it's important and you trust them, go crazy. You know what I mean? But I think it's like it's a little bit of a gut thing that I think people. I would never want to devalue data. That's really something. But I think the gut has been lost, and I think that
Yes.
that's like kind of what I act on, and I think that that's like in short supply in some ways. And I think that we can't forget that like instinct is like what gets you to where you are. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Like, and I think that's part of my thinking with that.
It's our job, literally.
Yeah, literally. No, literally. I know.
So the last thing I want to discuss, because I know that we have a few minutes left before we go to questions from the audience, is this idea around getting the right attention is important. You know, a lot of people think you have to do more to get the right attention. Where does that leave mystery in everything? You know, where does that leave going slower when it comes to the creative directors, when it comes to where you're available, if you're actually for loyalty schemes, for instance, Totem, for instance, the Swedish brands, where you're at today, they actually just launched a kind of loyalty program, so to say, get exclusive content first, making sure you get products that no one else can get, you know, getting the sale first. And also with creative directors, you know, some brands don't put their creative directors too much forward. Where does getting the right attention leave mystery?
I mean, it's something I talk about all the time, and it's obviously the fault of social media and all of our collective egos. But I think that the need for like credit and recognition has kind of led us to a place where things have just changed, I think, for the worse. But I do think that I think about it in terms of like, you know, the 90s and how people had a mystery to them, and when you saw them it was exciting. You see these photos of people from that era and you can tell they just feel free. It feels different because they weren't, you know, if a paparazzi catches them, the paparazzi catches them. That's the, you know, but they're not doing it themselves. But I think that the it's a fine line. It really is a fine line. I think that there's because you also don't want to come off as too controlled and contrived. You don't want to, you know, you don't want to, you know, because it's like when celebrities won't be interviewed by anyone they don't know. For, you know, they write an essay instead of doing an interview for a cover. It's like that doesn't feel good either. So it's like, what is the answer? Honestly, I don't know. I crave the mystery. Like, I like that. I think it's sexy. I think it's attractive, and I think it's like why we still talk about Phoebe Philo when she hasn't put clothes out in years. You know, because we don't know that much about her. We don't know where she is. We know it's coming, but we don't know anything about it. Like, if she was teasing it on Instagram, it wouldn't feel quite the same. You know what I mean?
Completely.
It just wouldn't. And I mean, and even with musicians, they're doing that now. The record just comes out. You know, the record just comes out. Like, they don't talk about it. It comes out. It's everywhere. And like, I think obviously Taylor Swift can do that, but I think that's as powerful for anyone. Like, if you really believe in your idea and you really believe in your concept, why don't you sit behind the scenes and really bake it and get it so tight and then just let it rock? Like, let it go, you know, give it to the world. I don't know. It's tough.
Complete. One thing I would say as a tip for everyone on this call is, believe me, if your product is good enough, like the people my generation, Chris's generation, will find it. Like,
100%.
it doesn't.
Yeah,
We're so plugged in. Like, we will find it, even if it's in a niche magazine, if it's on a platform that's still emerging, we'll find it.
No, it's easier and harder to find what you love at the exact same time. At the exact same time, it's the hardest and easiest it's ever been.
So we're going to go to questions. Not sure how to do this. I think should we read them out?
I see one. We can start with this one here if you don't. From Amara.
There's one in the chat. There we go.
Which platforms would you say are the most successful for each of your brands? I'll let you take that one to start.
I'll start. Yes. So we, I mean, Instagram was big for Nanushka specifically. You know, we were actually among the first 3 brands working with influencers. You know, think of the Gainis of the world and Anushkas of the world. This is long before any luxury brand would really touch influencers. You know, they didn't see them at the same level as the classic editors. Just a testament to show you how slow the fashion industry is compared to how progressive we are, that we say, you know. But Nanushka is big on Instagram. You know, we're going to venture into TikTok because we know that there's a lot of products that we create and also stories to tell that wouldn't necessarily fit a more glossy shoot. And also we want to attract a different generation, right? You know, the younger generation's coming up and that's starting to get spending power. Sunai, it's a funny one because they are big on Instagram, but they don't post that much. Every time they post, they have crazy engagement because I genuinely believe that brand is one of the most creative in the entire world, especially the 2 creative directors, Simone and Loris.
Agreed.
TikTok Gold once they go on there. But what they do on their website, which actually has been a big driver for them, is to get people to really experience their universe that they've, you know, carefully built. So if you go on their website, for instance, that's almost where most of the storytelling is done in terms of AR, in terms of VR of new products. We have Sunai Radio now. That's a 24-hour radio show in which they plug young talent coming up constantly. They do their books, a lot of physical events as well. And then Aeron, which is a smaller brand that we have, Instagram as well at the moment. But it's interesting to think about your own website.
I agree. I mean, I think that there's something, I mean, I think we're going to return to like classic blogging. We already are. We've kind of like, so the popularity of like Substack is basically like, this is just a blog. We've re-engineered a blog, but I do think there's something to be said about the classic email. I think the classic email, when it's done right, really works. I think there's a lot of people that think email is like some old fogey stuff, but we all use it every day and we all have it, you know, and there's like, some brands are really good at it and you really look forward to it. And I think I think using email as like this kind of controlled, maybe text led, like vehicle is something that we should be looking at a little bit. I think it's like, I think the death of it is really overstated, you know, because of the popularity of newsletters, I think people are thinking of email differently. You know, I think they're thinking of it as like a place to find and like experience information they want versus like somebody from work is annoying me. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I think it's a little bit like that. I think
it feels more mysterious again, right? Kind of that
no,
one interaction.
100%. But I think what Stussy does on Instagram is really powerful. Like they really punch above their weight. As far as like followers and engagement on that content. And I think it's really like all over the place, from like a full-on campaign to like stuff that was shot with an iPhone. You know, it really can go every way, but because they have such a brand ID and the guys there are so dialed in, it always feels real. And I think that's a great example.
Last question, Celine, I'll read this one out. With so many social media platforms today, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and the rise of new ones such as Be Real, for example, how can brands stay consistent with their line of communication on platforms that have such different types of content and audience? It's a great question.
Yeah, I think that might be the answer we're searching for the rest of our days. I mean, I think that like, to me, honestly, TikTok feels like the most specific as far as like, there's like a way you do that and the way it looks and the way it feels that's very different than the other stuff listed that seems pretty straight ahead to me. But I think it's about having the voice at the top be pretty singular and direct. You know, like I think it's like if you have a concept that's really strong and you have the right team to distill it down to these different platforms, I think it can be done and feel good. You know, obviously TikTok's gonna look different than Instagram and whatever, but I think that like there is a way, but it comes from the top. It has to be like strong.
Yes. Last one will be very quick. We know we have 1 minute left. Michelle Fernandez asks, what do you think is an effective way to create that mystery in the retail area? As in maybe not using social media so much, mostly as a strategy. Is it even possible?
Oof. I want to say yes. You know, I want to say yes. I want the idea of the 500 square foot store that you just kind of like, it's in the right place and you go in and it has you know, I think that can happen in the right city. I think it can happen. I do.
I would also say something around store employees, right? You know, this idea, you go into a Stone Island store, for instance, they know so much about, you know, their USP, of course, around which is product development. You know, you can't get that experience online. You can't get that experience in a different store. So, you know, having those kind of secrets and that secret relationship with store employees is something that is a big driver of creating that mystery that you can't get elsewhere.
That's a good call.
I see we have a few more questions, but I think we're over time. I think that's it for this one. Chris, I want to thank you for your time.
I want to
Enjoy
thank you.
Stockholm.
Yeah, I will. I'll do my best. I'm gonna go do some retail reporting right now myself. I appreciate you.
Any questions that were unanswered, feel free to hit up Chris at Done to Death Projects on his Instagram. Let's start there on Instagram. And myself, I have a bit more of a tricky name on Instagram, but you can find me at Christopher Morence, and it starts with a double AR if you need to find it. Thank you for Launch Metrics as well for having us, and hopefully we can meet some of you soon.
Later. Thank you.